We've seen recently a number of arrests from members of the NSN. Do you think that that threat of violence is increasing from these groups?
Well, if you go by some of the news reports of the recent arrests, and they've been coming at a clip of a couple of months, which is a pretty significant pace. Certainly the threat of violence from these groups has escalated. And if you go by what ASIO has publicly declared its figures around the caseload, they said it's 40% of our caseload at the moment. That's a big increase. So there's certainly a concern around violence emanating from these groups. But I think the other important point to make is that we need to be concerned about violent plotting, violent attacks, targeting the general public and targeting government and other figures. But there are other harms that come from these groups. So they significantly can erode social cohesion. They're often involved in hate crimes and hate speech, which has a really corrosive effect as well. So this hateful ideology, this hateful extremism, like some of my colleagues like to call it, does have broader effects on our society, on our social cohesion, on the future of our democracy. So the threat from these groups is not just about violent terrorist attacks, it's much broader.
You mentioned their propensity for violence from some of the more rusted-on QAnon supporters. Do you think there's a physical threat in Australia from the QAnon movement?
Look, at the moment, as far as what I've seen now, law enforcement can certainly, and intelligence agencies might be seeing something different. We haven't seen any plots develop, for example, or movement toward violence. But these things do tend to appear all of a sudden and very quickly. It's something we need to keep an eye on. It's important to note, too, that QAnon believers have been involved in a number of plots over the years in the United States and in Europe. There have been conspiracy believers who have been involved in plots in Australia, for example, to assassinate key political figures. There were threats against the Premier, Dan Andrews, from a conspiracy believer as well. So there have been signs. We haven't been seeing a lot of it lately, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on.